Any other questions? Yes, Alyssa.
So you have a contract with the current seller right now?
Correct. Yeah, and that's a fair point. So, yeah, I'd like to assure you all that we do have a legally binding contract with the current property owners, that I've actually spent significant time with them and their attorney going over the contract in full, including that we would be applying for TIF and our intentions with the properties.
So the current seller is aware of the demoing and all of that for your project?
It was in the contract that we were going after TIF, yeah, and that we were upfront from the beginning that we would be tearing the structures down if we could not move them off.
And then in your contract, is it contingent on this blight?
It's contingent on us getting TIF, which initially we thought we'd have enough time to be able to get TIF, but with the events that kind of happened, right now we're just trying to get the blight substandard under this contract.
And so then you're the manager of the company that has the contract with?
Correct.
So you have no partnership or anything, and you just manage their?
No, I do have a 50% ownership stake in the company, yeah.
Any other questions from the council? Seeing none, thank you, Thomas. Anyone else from the public wish to comment on this item?
No, go ahead.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Severs. I live at 222 Wildwood Road in Seward. I also serve as Vice President for Enrollment and Marketing at Concordia University, which plays into the reason I'm here. I would like to begin by saying that Concordia doesn't really desire not to take a position on especially the project to follow, but I would like to just make a comment about the state of properties that are in question and our interest in having those be attractive. As has been stated by several people tonight, it's an important front porch to Concordia right across the street, and in my line of business at Concordia, where we have 600 to 800 families that visit for private visits in addition to all the other people that come for other events. First impressions are really important to us, and while I agree that Columbia Avenue in general makes a wonderful first impression about Seward, there are elements of Columbia Avenue that don't, and it's important to us that somehow the city take action to make sure that we do have attractive homes, buildings, an attractive entrance to campus, and so that's an important thing to us. I know that the project that is at hand involves apartments, and it's been mentioned that there are maybe hopes that Concordia students would occupy those. I don't want to speak to that necessarily unless you have questions about that specifically, because I think the directive from Mayor Eichmeyer was that we're here just to talk about the blight section. But if you do have questions about Concordia's enrollment, the opportunity to fill those apartments, I would certainly entertain those questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
I mean, you can just get us a rundown. I mean, Thomas has met with most of us to explain what he wants to do. So it's known to most of us that his intent and setup is for student housing and not true multifamily type of building where Jane and her son are going to move in, and a small family of four into an apartment. The design and the intent behind it is for student housing. So I think the enrollment that Concordia does play a role in that, and I agree that gets more into the TIF application side. But at the same point in time, my comment early on is I don't want to lead Thomas down a path that at some point he'll get tripped up.
That's a fair question, so I can speak to that, and I'll try to do it briefly. Concordia enrolls 1,250 students on our undergraduate campus. We have a on-campus residency requirement for the first 3 years. with a few exceptions. And so roughly 20% of our students live off campus. Those are mostly seniors. Right now, our residence halls have capacity to handle, maybe if we squeeze, up to about 75 more students before we would be totally full. We do not have any plans in our 10-year campus plan to build additional residence halls. Part of that is given just the demographics in Nebraska. High school graduates, it's going to be hard to grow. Nevertheless, we do have goals to grow over the next 5 years. Our enrollment plan is to grow by about 150 students. So conceivably, if we could handle half of those, the other half would have to be absorbed in rental housing off campus somewhere. So our students have done that with good effect. The things that are important to us when students do move off campus would be A, it has to be safe and suitable housing for them. Sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not. But that would be important. Another thing that would be important to us, and we are getting that for the most part right now, is that there would be housing that's close to campus. One of the things that we know about college students and college and their experience is that the most potent part of the college experience is what happens outside the class. That's why we have the residency requirement. We feel it's important for students to be on campus for 3 years. But for those students who do move off, if they have easy access, easy walking distance to the cafeteria, the classrooms, the library, and all the events that go on campus that enrich the experience, that's an important element to us. Now, that's not to say that that isn't being served right now, but those are some things that we would look for if we were to push more students off campus. We would want them to have that kind of the same experience.
Thank you. Alyssa?
You stated that you don't have any plans in 10 years to actually build an apartment or like a facility on your campus, but in the next 5 years you guys project that you will see massive growth. Or not massive, but I mean growth.
Modest growth.
I mean huge amount.
If I do my job right.
So I guess my question is in your 15 to 20 year plan, if structure became available for purchase, does Concordia see possibly purchasing apartments that would become available and close to campus to house students? I mean, is that something that?
That is not in our master facility plan. Things change, obviously, but right now we do not have anything related to residence halls in our master facility plan except renovation of our current residence halls, which is an ongoing process. We try to do that on a regular basis.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to comment on this item? Welcome.
My name is Patty Beck, and I live at 1631 North Columbia. Yeah. Well, I think what I've heard tonight with the TIF and with the funding and with the blighted thing, it definitely, for the residential areas, it can definitely open doors for a lot of improvement. With that being said, it can be a good thing or it can be kind of a scary thing. So I think what I'm kind of hearing is that that we have nothing against Thomas, nothing against anybody here, as Gary was saying, but I feel like this was kind of like a drive-through in Seward to see what could be blighted, to see what could be beneficial to an investor. So I think on that end of it, it could be a scary thing for Seward, because then how many other investors are going to drive through? So that's something to take in consideration. I realize this is a new thing with the residential area. I think that I kinda came up with 3 words: integrity, maintain, and growth. And I think the integrity needs to be that all of this is done with integrity. And that, I feel like maybe this area, my understanding is it's been in bad shape for some time. All of a sudden, there's a drive-through, we see that's available, and this is being hurried along. That's a little scary. So, I just think that it really needs to be looked at good, true integrity, and, definitely something to think about. It can be very exciting for Seward, because there are areas that need to be fixed up. I just hate to see a blighted area used to benefit some, and what this is gonna be opening the door to. On the other hand, the word maintain. I think, Seward, which I'm hearing a lot of, is that we need growth, and, you know, growth is good, it can be good. But before new growth is added, I think we need to be able to take care of what we have, and I believe that's what people who have kids try to teach their kids: take care of what you have already. So we have areas that obviously need to be taken care of here, that haven't been taken care of. Why they haven't been taken care of, I don't know. Nothing's been done about them. We have areas, specifically older homes, and maybe, you know, with this new thing with the residential areas, something can be looked at, incentives, money that could be used to fix them up, maybe in the blighted conditions, maybe some help from TIF or from other some types of help. My understanding is there are multiple TIF approvals, and I'm not sure how this would go together, but there's people in this town that can figure it out, and I think this, before we jump to every investor coming in here trying to demolish these places, I think we need to try to preserve some of the nice houses we have. I realize they're older. I'm older. You know, I could be blighted, but I'm just saying that, you know, they're worth looking into. There's some nice houses around this area. So that's something to I think, take a look at, to see how, I think there were a lot of questions here tonight on how this works with this TIF, and I think there might be still questions that haven't really been answered, and I think, with the work that all of you do, I appreciate what you do, that maybe this should be looked into a little bit more and see how it can really help Seward and really help the families that are here, families that have been here for years, these houses that have been here for years, if they can be taken care of. If not, then maybe, you know, they can be demolished and something that fits into that community similar can be added, and it would help the housing need. So anyway, something to look into. And then the next word, growth. I think growth is great if it's done right. It could be great for the whole community, but I think growth just for the sake of growing, and we don't do it right, it's not going to be handled right. I would think it needs to be planned and done right, and I think that's going to take time without jumping into the first thing that comes along. I think Seward is a place people want to call home, and as I said, I live on Columbia Avenue, further down towards the school, and I realize those houses are fairly new the last so many years, but they were put in, I mean, they're nice places. They're not just, it's not an eyesore right there. So, you know, I guess my question is if there's need for apartments around here, no problem. But is Columbia Avenue the ideal place for it? And if I heard right, I believe, which I did again tonight, that he's talking 3 apartment units. That's a lot of apartment units. That's a lot of apartments, I should say. And I know before I had asked him, if you can't fill it up with college students, will you open it to the public? He said yes. Now he's an investor, and like I said, nothing against him, but he's investing. Is he gonna take care of these apartments? I don't know. So open it up to the public or even the students. This would definitely take away from the current residential area. And I realize there are apartments there for the college, but you can't really see them when you're driving down Columbia there, unless you really look. So there will be a parking lot for these apartments, but if anybody that's living in an apartment knows, there's usually not sufficient parking. So then you have people parking on the streets because they have extra cars, or you have guests that are coming there, so there's more parking there on the streets. Not to mention the extra traffic. At times on Columbia Avenue, there's already a lot of traffic. Columbia Avenue is a popular area. But, you know, there's a lot of spaces in Seward, a lot of open spaces. And not everything has to be on Columbia Avenue. It's already jammed up. You know, there's so much there. You start putting apartment buildings, it's just gonna make it more of a mess. Go to some of these outlying areas that have more space. Put the apartments there. That'll help build up people here in Seward. And as far, you know, I have nothing to obviously say about this, but even that area right there to be zoned for R4, I don't know why that is. I think that should be rezoned. I know it was rezoned a while back, but I think it should go back to R1 or R2. There's really no place for an apartment there. There's too much congestion as it is. And like I said, there's a lot of open spaces elsewhere. Last, I question if a 4-unit apartment, which I believe was done with one of the houses in question, couldn't be maintained, taken care of, which my understanding is it's been in bad shape for quite a while, then stop and think about 3 apartment buildings with apartments. Who's gonna take care of those? Before we start adding to this area, I think it needs to be looked at. I think things need to be checked over, researched on why everything's fallen apart the way it is, and no one's enforced anything. So hopefully it won't continue. And you know, these apartments could end up the same way. If we're doing the same thing the same way we've been doing it, they could turn out to be unlivable because nothing is being enforced around here. Those buildings, you know, grant you, there are owners there. But for a unit to be put in there with 4 apartments, for these places to get the shape they were in, there's a problem here. There's a problem in other parts of Seward. And before we start adding and growing, we need to take care of that problem, research why there is a problem before we start opening doors to situations that could be the same for generations to come, for our kids, for future residents. We want Seward to be nice. We want it to look nice. We want it to be welcoming. We want people to want to live here, not because of cheap rent or because they can't afford anything else. We want it to be appealing to people that they want to live here. Downtown Seward is beautiful. The court house area, it's beautiful. Let's start from the inside of Seward, work our way to the outside, try to redo what's there, and try to figure out what the problem is with these places falling apart and why nothing's reinforced before we add a bunch of apartments. So I guess that would be my thing, that, you know, apartments could be great. I think on another part of Seward that there's a lot of land here in Seward. You know, not right there. Columbia Avenue. There's a lot going on Columbia Avenue. We don't need anything more. We definitely don't need 3 apartment buildings. So anyway, thank you for your time.
Yep, thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to comment on this item? Welcome.
Hi, I'm Erin Whitus. I live on North 4th Street. I drive by these streets almost every day. I'm a small business owner, and I've talked to numerous people on the board, and they know we're all passionate about growing Seward. and we also know that it needs to grow, and we also know that economic development has to happen, because as small business owners, we rely on growth, and we rely on maintaining the business that we have. So I don't think if we asked anyone in this room, I don't think anyone in here would say, no, we don't want growth, or no, we don't want change. I don't think anyone would say that. The reason I'm here is just because I think I walked out of last night having more questions than I had answers. And I think that while I understand this is simply about blighting, and I have no problem with blighting, I have no issue with it, I do agree with the point that we do need to address why this specific area is blighted and the ramifications in the future that it brings to our community, and to other business owners and homeowners within Seward. To answer some of your questions about the timeline, you know, I've had an opportunity to talk to both economic development, and I've also had the opportunity to talk to the homeowners. And, you know, there are a few things that, you know, don't really sit entirely right with how the timeline came about, which is a concern, and I think it's a concern of maybe a lot of people who are here. And with all this being said, I do want to see Thomas, I do want to see other people like him succeed, because it's so important, right? Like, if we're turning away the people who could be here for 50, 60, 70 years developing this community, why would we start doing that now, right? However, do the end justify the means? And I think in this conversation about blighting, it all started because we want to know the end, because there was an end in mind. So we kind of have to talk a little bit about the end, because we're talking about the means because we know the end. So, or we know the perceived end. We don't know if it'll be approved, which I have questions about that as well. But the homeowners were given, the houses received complaints in September. One was actually from the developer themselves, which anyone can make complaints about any houses, right? I can name plenty of houses in this town that I could just walk up to the door, file a complaint about them, and have the city go and check them out. I've lived in one of them. And so I see that, and okay, we're gonna go with the blighting, okay. The homeowners have yet to go to court. I've seen their court documents, I've seen their letters served to them by the city, and they have yet to go to court, which is tomorrow, addressing the porch issues and the things that they've been asked to fix within their home. So, meaning, we're blighting a home, and we're blighting this area for the purpose of tearing them down, because the purchase agreement essentially could end on December 18th. They were given 90 days to get the approval. It has to be approved for TIF funding by December 18th. So we are kind of under a timeline, and we do have to address it because there is a timeline and there is an end that we need to talk about. And so, so there's this push of getting this done without the homeowners having the appropriate due process of them going to court, seeing how this is decided, seeing what should be done with their properties. I'm not even saying that they shouldn't be blighted. I'm not saying that this shouldn't happen, but I am saying I think that we should let the process figure itself out first within the homeownership. But then you start getting into that and you say, well, they signed this thing and we have now a time frame where we're under pressure, because in order for this whole thing, because I can guarantee you on December 18th, if TIF isn't approved, a homeowner of lot 34 and Lincoln 8 will be pulling out of the agreement. So that's why we're here, right? So to just simply say, well, we're only here to talk about blighting is a little bit naive in the decision making, because we all can have an honest conversation about what we really should be doing with these properties. I'm not gonna get into my opinion on what should go on the street. I'm not a city developer. I have my opinions, but you know, I work with how our city decides to grow our town, and I work with businesses, and I want to welcome everyone. But I do think that there needs to be a precedent set for every business owner and every homeowner, property owner in Seward, that they are given a fair opportunity to address the issues on their property before something like this is made for the end decision. So that's where I have a problem, is that if this were simply just, we're looking to blight an area because we want future development to happen here, these are rundown properties, I'd say, yeah, I think we can agree there's a lot of areas, and this might be one of them. I've been in one of those houses, you know, about 12, 13 years ago, and I thought it was gonna fall over on me. So, but when we come to this conclusion because we have a specific end and a specific deadline in place, I just don't know that today is the right day for us to be making that decision, knowing that we can't talk about the end, but we need to talk about the end. Because there is an end, there is an application that will be processed, there is something that is going to be happening there, which is also why, I don't know if she plans on talking, but I'm sure you'll hear why the homeowner doesn't want to see her family home, her family, her mother's house torn down. They signed the agreement is, it's a legally binding contract, they have that, so the only thing we're talking about is the fact that there is a deadline, a 90-day deadline that was outlined in the contract that will, that addresses the blight issues. So I just wanted to say, like, as you vote on it, just think about the process that was given to the homeowners and the unanswered questions we have relating to this, and is it the right time today to be making that decision, knowing that this is going to be removing those houses and taking them down, and specifically for a development project. On the note of Concordia, unless we've got a specific mind frame, I can also, if you have questions about what Concordia students can afford, in order to fill those houses, in order to fill those spaces in those apartments, I will tell you, it's gonna have to be cheap. And I don't know anyone, talking to other people who build apartments, I don't know, how we're making money, just focusing on college students, if that makes sense. So that's, I guess, in generality what I have to say, but, if you have any questions, you can ask me about some of them.
Thank you. Any questions? Saying none, thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to comment on this item? Welcome.
My name is Rachel Beck. I live at 1631 North Columbia. Okay, so I guess my thought is along the same lines, if I was listening correctly. The concern about what has brought this about. I've lived in Seward for just over a year and a half, and it's just been down from these properties. And they have looked this way since I've lived here and visited prior to. I guess one of my biggest concerns are these complaints that started coming out. I've been hearing September of this year, and I am wondering if there have been prior complaints to this. I don't know if anybody can answer that.
When you're finished, I can ask Ed to come up and
Okay.
maybe you can invite us.
Okay. So my concern is that, there are houses like this all over town, and if there have been complaints on them, and the only complaints that have been coming through in September, there is an end to this, and that's what it seems like. We're rushing and we're using this blight study to go ahead. I get that TIF is a really good tool, and I get that things need to happen around this town. None of us can disagree with that. But that would be one of my concerns, is the standards that we've set in this town for houses that look like this. We're basically opening up that opportunity for any kind of developer to come in and do the same, where they can just pay for a study and take control of that, that area. And then I've heard that, one of the complaints did come from the developer. It is a little bit concerning because we have people that live there, and we have people who are neighbors there, and their property values aren't looking so great because they have these rundown areas right next to them. And so those are complaints I can get behind, but for a complaint just to get them moved to go ahead and go with the blight study is a little bit a little bit of a red flag to me, in my opinion. And so I've noticed that zone, or lot 2 in this whole situation, isn't listed as having any issues whatsoever. And that's one of the concerns that I have as well, is that we've taken this little area and we've said that these 4, we're gonna review these 4 places. And the majority of them are in disrepair and fall within this blight. And now this one is caught up in the middle of that. And so going forward now, any developer, are we saying that they could say, I wanna look at this place because I have a plan? And we have someone who has immaculately kept up their house, and they get caught up in the middle of this, and we are now saying that it's okay because we've already approved blight studies for, specific redevelopment, not just future redevelopment that's needed, but specific redevelopment. It seems like, we are rushing through this and saying that, you know, they've paid for the study, they've made the complaints, and now they gotta go through with it. What other areas can be done that way, instead of specific, needed redevelopment that we know needs to happen, we're now saying people gonna kind of pick what they wanna do, because we're setting this precedent. So that's what makes me a little nervous with this. Yeah, so, the same thing, is like, what is gonna stop other companies from basically saying the same thing? I'm gonna pay for this blight study, I'm gonna make a complaint, pay for the blight study, and get control of this, and now we've got some other properties mixed up in this because they just happen to be there. I don't know what's happened with the city, I don't know what the standards are for other houses that are in disrepair. You know, I know there's notices, but are there some that have had notices years ago and nothing's been done on it? Because now we're rushing through this process in order to get to the end. I feel like some standards are missing in there. If we do in fact have houses that have had complaints for years and we've done nothing to uphold them, and now we're just gonna rush through to this. So I would just caution to look at that. I'm not saying no or yes to this, I'm just saying to be aware of what kind of precedent this is setting, as it could open a door for other, you know, people doing the same thing, so.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none? Hey, just, I'm gonna have a couple, go ahead, I'm sorry. Ed, could you tell us what the history to her question as far as complaints in the past?
Previous complaints that I can recall were received for 645 North Columbia.
About what time frame, like how long ago are we talking about?
Multiple complaints the last couple of years.
Okay,
That's the only one.
okay. And as far as the complaints that were a part of, the most recent ones, can you just quickly describe what those were?
We had a complaint about 8 Lincoln from the post office
And what was that?
concerning the porch and the safety of the mail carriers delivering mail onto
Okay.
that porch.
What was the second one?
Second one was from a neighbor complaining about junk and smells and rodents at 34 Lincoln.
Okay, and then the third one?
The third one was for 645 North Columbia, which was a complaint about an RV parked in the yard with a pipe coming out of it, dumping liquid onto the ground.
Okay, and I think that was the one that Thomas, I believe.
Correct.
Yeah, is that not right?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanna state that to clarify, I mean, my complaint, I was out there taking measurements and there was an RV sitting out there with a sewage line going onto the grass, and I saw Ed later that day, and I mean, I guess I would think any citizen of Seward would probably say something if they saw sewage just going onto the grass. So that was my complaint.
Would you consider any of those trivial, or are those, did you follow up on all of these then?
Absolutely.
Okay, and was there anything else as far as when you followed up, did you notice anything else that was concerned?
Yeah, once I started investigating a property for property maintenance codes, and then I started looking at the whole property.
Was the gas company involved in this?
Gas company was involved with 645 North Columbia, reporting that the gas had been shut off due to a delinquent gas bill
Okay,
and a red tag furnace that had gas leaks.
okay. So when we talk about the complaint-driven process, just to make it clear is that, you know, we don't, like, Ed doesn't go, you're not gonna Ed's not just gonna randomly knock on your door and say, I'm gonna walk through and and start complaining about things. Typically there's a complaint that comes in. I think this one in particular, the gas company notified you. I think that's what started part of this. So, I know there's been a lot of written about conspiracy theories, but unless you think the federal government with the post office and the state government with TIF and the city government with inspections all agreed on a plan, which I don't think has ever happened, there isn't a conspiracy that I'm aware of with these properties. And as far as the timing, and Andrew, could you come up real quick just to clarify? Thanks, Ed. The complaints are part of the consideration, right? You're making faces at me during part of this.
Well,
I want to make sure I
I
understood.
do want to, yeah, I
Yeah.
thought this was important clarification.
Go ahead.
The complaints, I guess, are mentioned here, but a complaint itself is not a part of the complaint isn't definitive in a blight designation or a study. I mean, it's the, cracks in the foundation, the furnace, the red tagged furnace. I mean, it's the items after the complaint. I mean, the complaints themselves, I guess, drove the investigation or whatever, but you could have multiple complaints and they turn out to be minor and it's not an issue. So the complaints themselves are not the factor. It's the conclusions from those complaints. So I think, because I was learning a little bit more, I didn't, I'm just hearing some things, and it's not it's not the complaints that's not the key to this at all. It is the condition of the property.
But you can see where, like, the timing would look suspicious if the complaint itself means you can then blight the
Sure.
property. There's a complaint that happens in September and the property ends up going through this process shortly after. I mean, I understand where that came from, and that's why I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah,
But the complaints weren't just from us or from the same person. It was multiple different entities, as far as I'm aware, are unrelated to each other.
Sure. Yeah. Correct. And again, to have the conditions that exist currently, that are identified in the study, and if those property owners would want to repair them and would want to fix them, there's nothing. And again, this is just outside of the facts specifically, because I don't know all of them. But if your property is declared blighted and substandard, I guess there's two issues. One of the newer house out of those four in the average age. Again, we talked about uniformity earlier, but doesn't mean universal. You will have, it's not that every single property has all those conditions. So you may have a very nice house in a blighted area, and that doesn't mean that doesn't have any effect. The second thing is you can live in a blighted area and go through that entire process and fix up your own house and do whatever you want, and there's nothing because of the blight this process, I guess, is different than any of the complaint process or anything on that side of things.
And then the last thing I just was going to ask you about, since you're here, is this isn't a situation where we're looking at eminent domain or we're looking at forcing someone to sell property or anything like that. I mean, because it sounds like people are nervous that someone's going to come into their neighborhood and start forcing all of these changes and put apartments in. But at the end of the day, if the owner of the property isn't wanting to utilize TIF and they're not willing to sell it to someone else, nothing happens as far as the TIF process is concerned. If there are issues with codes or other issues, obviously we would deal with that like we would any other situation. So even if at the end of the day, if the council decides no, we're not going to go forward with this, and the TIF application therefore doesn't happen, Ed's still going to be working on these houses to try and get them in compliance. The problem is that oftentimes what's done is the houses, with particularly houses that are turned into rentals, is they're not going to ever restore the house to its original glory. The improvements that typically happen are to address the concern, and oftentimes it's a minimal repair. And so that's why, just to kind of clarify some of this, is that yes, we have a process, and yes, we go through the process. It may not always be noticeable, because the violations may be interior, and sometimes, if they're exterior, like they haven't mowed their grass in a month, and the neighbors are calling us, we can go mow it, but that's a temporary fix, because if they don't mow the next month, guess what, we're back. And the process starts over on that particular violation. So did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to echo.
Is that fair? I mean,
Yeah, that is, regardless of the whole complaint process and any, you know, red tagging, condemnation, anything like that, nobody could, the city doesn't really force any project. These are going to be a TIF there's going to be a TIF application. So there's no requirement that anybody sell their property, that anybody do anything. And what was the other thing I was gonna say? Shoot, I lost it now. Well, I think they're just two separate processes. The blight designation, I mean, you're not forced to sell your property, you're not forced to use it. I know the other thing I was gonna say, and again, we're pretty far ahead of the process here, talking about any sort of improvements, but again, the idea of TIF is you are creating a increase in valuation on the property, and that increase in valuation is what drives all of this financing. So the idea of, you know, is it gonna be a nice property, is somebody gonna maintain it? I would argue, presumably, yeah, you're gonna have better maintenance, you're gonna have a nicer property that's gonna remain nicer, because if you let that property value go down, the developer's on the hook for costs. So again, that's way ahead of this, what we're talking about tonight. But as far as the entire TIF process is, the only value of TIF is the increase in valuation of the property. So if you increase the value of the property, and then you let it go into disrepair in a few years, you don't get the value of that TIF. Again, that's.
And as you said earlier, they're guaranteed, and it goes along with the property owner, and so if they sell it, the new owner would be liable.
They'd be liable,
for
yeah.
that as well.
For the.
And that does happen, because sometimes even accidentally, the county assessor estimate of the valuation ends up coming in high, and then the actual valuation is lower. We've had this happen in Seward, where then the whoever did the project, they're paying their property taxes, but it's not covering the TIF loan. So they personally have to pay the difference to make up for that. And so that's the risk you run with this program, if for some reason the valuation, because you might think, oh, I want a larger increment to help with the project, but if it's not justified by the final valuation, you're gonna have to make up the difference.
Coming out of pocket.
Yeah,
You end up paying, we call it, you know, the payment in lieu of taxes.
Right.
It's effectively you're paying extra taxes on, you know, for that 15-year period.
Okay, sounds good. Any questions for Andrew before we go back to the public?
I don't necessarily for Andrew, but I do for Ed, if that's possible.
Yeah, Ed, can you come forward, please? Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
Yep.
Hi, Ed.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm here.
Good. So one of my questions is for you is when the current owner was given or notified of this complaint, explain that process to me. You file a complaint with her, or you give her a document, right?
We draft a notice and orders that lists the code violations
Okay,
and give them 30 days to comply.
okay. Do you have a date on when the first one was given to her? Was it September?
It was in September, I believe, yes.
Okay, and so then she was given 30 days, and then did she respond in those 30 days with here's my plan of action?
No.
Or I'm underneath contract with somebody, I've sold the property, there was nothing in communication there?
No plans to make remedies or rectify the code violations, other than 8 Lincoln Street. There was a demo permit pulled to demo the porch off of 8 Lincoln Street and build a new smaller porch. Those permits were obtained and paid for and issued, and then a couple days later or a week later, I forget the time frame, I was notified by the contractor that was hired to do that job that the owner changed their mind.
Okay, and so then is there a second notice that's given after the first 30 days that there's no compliance to the first order?
No.
Then how many days is it until they then go to court? What's the process of court? Is court on us because of this?
Well, from recent council meetings, I've been directed by the council and city administration to follow up these non-compliant notice and orders with having the police department issue citations.
Okay. Okay. And so court is tomorrow on that? Is that what I
I've been contacted by the county attorney. We have a meeting Thursday. She indicated that she was gonna continue the court date to a later date.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you for.
Thanks, Ed. Well, is there any other questions for Ed? Okay. Oh, yeah, hang on. John?
So, Ed, is this the first residence that we've actually went to court on that have had citations or been considered a blighted home or?
I have deferred several cases to city attorney, and for prosecution, they just have not gone anywhere until city council has instructed me to actually have the Seward Police Department issue a citation to move the prosecution along.
So out of our long list, why is this one getting singled out?
It was the most recent, and due to the history of the owners involved.
My concern is, we've got ones that have been on for years. Why is this one getting singled out of this?
And just to be clear, I mean, we're kind of going down,
Way off topic.
we're getting way off topic. I mean, the matter,
And you're starting to talk about pending litigation.
Right.
That's
yeah,
making me concerned.
okay. Kelly's concerned.
Thanks, Kelly.
And then I get concerned. We can, I get what you're saying. We've talked about, the process, and that's why we're here, because we have done that in the past. And so that's the other reason is, Ed's just doing his job. Yep.
Absolutely.
Ed's going forward, like the council has directed, and we've then implemented that policy. And just to make the other point about, whether there are complaints or not, the property would, Andrew, can you come forward real quick? Based on the report that we got from RDG, if there have been no complaints filed, what would be the conclusion?
That's exactly right. The complaints are irrelevant to the conclusion. The complaints were part of because they existed.
Right.
But the conditions that exist on those properties now are driving that conclusion. And so the fact that there is those concerns that exist, the cracked foundations, the broken up sidewalks, all those things, the turned off gas, every single one of those things, those are the issues that drive the conclusion in the study and really the designation of blighted and substandard. The fact that whether there's a complaint or not doesn't affect the overall, again, blight and substandard is completely different than code enforcement. They're just two different things. So whatever happens in code enforcement, it will go on in a separate, just a totally separate avenue than blight and substandard. They could fix them up, and that's great, but again, that really is irrelevant to the blight and substandard designation. It's the conditions that exist on the property, totally separate. The things that are noted in that study, those physical conditions, regardless of whether there has been a complaint about it or not.
Okay, thanks, Andrew, for clarification. Any questions? If not, come forth. Welcome.
I guess I better come and speak. I'm Sandra Nolan, owner of the property. Concerning the house that has been condemned, when you're in discussions with a prospect buyer, why do you want to repair if it's going to be demolished or somebody else is gonna buy it? Why not let them do the repairs? And maybe for a little bit less money. Okay, that's what happened with the house at 645 Columbia. They were in discussions as to what amount of money would be paid and accepted. We do not think any apartments, regardless of what they are going to be, should be there for the property owners and the other property values, because the other homeowners, their property values, I think, will go down. That's my opinion. I guess all of the homes in the area must be at least 40 years old. So, yes, we are insulted. We plan to do porch repairs, have gotten estimates, and then the fire downtown hit us. We're still recuperating and have not recuperated. The house is being used as storage until the auction. And yes, the porches should have been done, but they got put on the back burner. I wonder why. It isn't that we haven't been, we've been lax, I guess. We got tired. Rudy's 85 and I'm 80. A lot of people our ages are not doing the things that we do. I feel that the city knew. They came the day after we signed papers that the porches had to be done. And yes, we had cars in the driveway. We had grandkids and a son who we'd been trying to get things out and hadn't until we got, you know, then we could say you had to move stuff. The porches, with the age of my 34 Lincoln Street house, needed to have a little bit more consideration than a month to find a proper contractor and what needed to be done on it. I paid the, fully intended to redo the porch because we had renters. Then several people kept asking me, Sandra, why do you want to do that? You're going to sell it. Well, I said, I don't know that I'm going to sell it. I don't like what's being happened. And when the city came, that really, Thomas, that really made my decision. So I'm not sure what's happening. Am I going to sell or am I not sell? He's going to take me to court. We could use everything, and I might be willing to do that because I think this has been underhanded, and I'm sorry. Ed told my husband he knew that Thomas had bought or was going to try and buy the property. When he gave me I was at Rogers because he's had some heart problems. He came and gave the citation to Rudy. I didn't sign it. For a court date the 19th, we go to court tomorrow morning, both of us. He gave us 2 on the 3-4 Lincoln Street, but he gave us 1 to me on 8 Lincoln. And he told Rudy verbally if Sandra would sign the papers that Thomas had given, which we got on the 26th of October, I wouldn't have to go to court. Now, how is a citation from the city involved? How does he know that we got this letter from Thomas saying they wanted my signature to say I would sign the final papers, because I had told him I wasn't going to sign. What is that to do with the city citation? So, with the September 18th, we signed on September 18th. On the 19th, he came with these porch papers, which then I thought, I stewed and stewed, cussed, and you better believe, I'm still mad. And knew something else was up besides. And on 12 days after I had signed the papers, that I didn't want to sign in the first place, but I had 4 men at me to sign those papers. And I gave in, and I shouldn't have. But I did. And I don't know that I'm going to sign anything more. But when the city knew that we had signed papers, everything would have always pretty much gone through except for the neighborhood. And the more I got to thinking about it, the more disgusted I got, I guess you can tell. So it's gonna be up to you to see if you're gonna set a policy for somebody else to come in and do this somewhere else to somebody. Yes, my porch needs redone, and we knew it. 12 college girls lived in the upstairs of the 3-4 Lincoln House when the Concordia needed extra dorm rooms. My folks helped them out. I don't know. I think I've probably pretty much covered it. Does anybody have a question?
Any questions from the council? Seeing none, thank you.
I am concerned too that the neighborhood people are unhappy about this, and that the city would change the dates of meetings in order to accomplish, help him out. What about the neighbors in the neighborhood? Don't they have something to say about this? They should. And if they don't, if you don't listen, we'll be all right if I do sign the papers. Financially, sure. But is that progress for Seward? Is that really what you want to do? They're gonna be the ones that are gonna suffer. Rudy and I, and with his age, do I bow down to him? I don't know. I'm not one to do. Anyway, it's up to you. Thank you.
Thank you. If you've already spoken.
I did, but I didn't go the 5 minutes. I have
Well,
something to
you
say.
actually went 10 minutes.
I'll give you
Hold on.
1 minute,
Hold
please.
on. No, we're not letting people come back up because otherwise we'll be
You
doing
let
something.
her come back up. 1 minute is all I
Who?
asked, right over here. You let her come back up. You did.
Because she asked Andrew a question.
Yeah, I asked her a question.
Okay, I want clarification.
Just so we're clear, hold on, just so we're
Your
clear here.
conspiracy thing
Hold
that
on,
you're
can I
making
finish?
fun of us
Hold
about.
on. I still gotta run the meeting, I think. We give everyone 5 minutes.
I didn't have 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah, you're right, you got 10 minutes. I timed it. I
Okay.
told him, hey, again, I'm serious here.
There is
Hey,
something,
hold on.
there's something
Hold-
going
can you-
on here.
Seriously,
There is
will
something
you stop?
going on.
Please. We give everyone 5 minutes to speak. Gary went first, he went 8 minutes. I allowed other people, yeah, it's your fault, Gary. So I let other people go longer than 5 minutes. I have not cut anyone off today. The longest was you at 10 minutes, and I let that go. If we let people keep coming up every time they hear something that they disagree with, we're never gonna get out of here, okay? And that's been the policy, it was the policy last night at the planning commission. So, I've never used this gavel, but tonight might be the night. So, unless someone has a specific question and they ask somebody to come back, obviously
I
Andrew
have a
Willis.
specific question.
No, if someone up here at the council has a specific question, they wanna ask someone out there to clarify, and that's what we did with Hobbit. Andrew is our attorney, so we asked him a lot of questions to clarify, so that he doesn't have a time limit. So just so we're clear, if anyone else who hasn't spoken yet would like to come up and speak, you can have 5 minutes. And if you wanna tell someone else your point and they can come up and talk, I don't care. You can do that, but we're not gonna let people keep coming back up with one more thing. That's like Columbo, just one more thing. I remember that. Welcome,
Thanks.
please state your name.
Please keep me to 3 minutes, because I'm nervous anyway, I hate talking in front of people.
You're
but
fine.
Born and raised in Seward, my name's Christy Dickey. I went to school with several people in this room. I'm gonna give you some thoughts of what I think. I have just recently been introduced to Mr. Caden by Jonathan J. I have visited with the city administrator and several other people in the community about doing developments, about adding things. I think there's a lot of areas, talking about lighting, because that's kind of our concern here, is there's several areas in this city that are very bad, whether they're being from landlords, for housing for rental units or whatever. I think that area is just as that. However, I think with Thomas developing within the community, I think there's areas of concern that I have seen and heard of Thomas and some of the routes he's going. But I think there's a right way and wrong way to do it, and I think if the reason why we need to blight it is because he needs the funding and the extra funding from the TIF, if that's the only reason, I think that is the wrong reason. Because I think if there's other areas in the community, let's say you guys wanna go do this somewhere, you guys are gonna have a lot of people in here wanting to get things blighted. If I wanna go develop and buy 3 properties in the south side of town or wherever, it's gonna allow those people to come in here and go through the same process. I think that, you know, there needs to be a huge development for apartment complexes in this community. They won't allow you to do it up by the schools, they won't allow you to do it over by the country club. You know, they won't allow you to do a lot of things because they're not zoned right, which is fine. But there's other options to that. If you don't blight it, can he put up the apartments? Here's a question, if you don't blight it, can he put up the apartment complexes without that being done using his own funding?
It's zone R4.
Okay, well then I suggest if that's what he wants to do, otherwise if it gets blighted, I think the people have something to say about it. But if he wants to put his own money in and show that he can do that, and if it's not set in the purchase agreement by Sandy saying he, you know, under these circumstances, I will sell you the property if you don't tear down the buildings. If it wasn't set up like that, I would say he can do whatever he wants with it. Because if there's so many areas of concern with so many neighbors and stuff saying, hey, we don't want apartments and this and that, and if Sandy didn't put it in her purchase agreement, I think blighting it for the TIF funding is wrong. I don't think that's right. I have been turned down so many times with zoning in this city. If we're looking at making things better and adding more things, then I think we need to look at those options. Was I under 3 minutes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wait,
Any
1 second, yeah.
questions?
Any questions before you run away? Now you can run away.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to speak on this item?
I just wanna say I apologize.
Oh, it's okay.
I apologize.
Welcome.
Thank you. Jessica Coulterman, 1059 Plainview, Seward. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight. I did send you all an email, kind of went over my main points, but I think we've gotten way off track here, and I just wanted to bring it back to we have a proposal for a very specific thing, and that is whether or not this area is blighted. And if you look at the statutory textbook, here's what blighted is. It's very clear that regardless of what development may or may not go there, this area fits that description to the letter. And so I just wanted to come up here and reiterate that point, because I think we've gotten into a lot of other discussions that don't pertain to exactly what on the letter you're looking at tonight. The other thing I'd like to say is, I also did not know Thomas until he reached out this weekend, and what really impressed me about him was the thoughtfulness that he had put into wanting to invest in the community. I learned after our conversation that he's also supporting other entrepreneurs in the area and trying to encourage them in their development in the area. And I think as somebody my age, I look at him and he's like a kid now to me, but to see somebody his age thoughtfully say, I want to be part of this community and I want to invest and put in deep roots here and continue to grow here, I think is something we all want to see as a community. So that was something that I was really impressed with, not only his interest, but his commitment to supporting other entrepreneurs as well. So blight and substandard statutory definition. Thank you.
Hang on, whoa, hang on. Any questions for Jessica? Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to speak on this? Welcome. Might be the only one left who hasn't yet.
I want to protect something.
Can you state your name and your address, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
for utilities for many years. And
I'm sorry, can I get your name
Dale Anderson,
and your address?
got my name.
Yeah, we just, okay, we just need it for the record.
6 North First, I live right next to the places that we were visiting.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And I got a question, you talked like we had a sloppy neighborhood, we had water and sewer lines and everything running all over the place. And it looked terrible and all this and that, and I put up with it for many years and I haven't seen all the things that you're talking about, or that you mentioned. And I just wanted to know that the electric company are good people, they handle situations when they are sent out to do so. The water department, every time there's been a problem there, it's been fixed. There was nothing around the neighborhood that I could see that was as bad as what you thought it was. I wanted to clear it up too. Our people do a good job. Our water department, the electric department, every time there was something on building, they fixed it. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to comment on this item?
Everybody's moaning back there, that's very quick. Linda Gearpeak, 1126 Eastridge. It's been very enlightening. I just sat back there and listened and got confused sometimes with all the legal stuff and back and forth. But you have to figure some of the points. A little concerning about process, you know, where we're going. And I just would encourage all of you to really take time and think this through. We're talking about the end result, and I know we're supposed to, excuse me, I'm emotional. We're supposed to concentrate on the blight issue, but yet it all is tied together. We all know that. And so I trust all of you to take all the comments that have been made here tonight and really carefully consider where we're headed. You know, if we blight this area, how does that set us up in the future? I kind of laugh when they said one of the designations, I think you said, for blighting as if the homes are over 40 years. Dean, we're in trouble. Everybody in Eastridge, we're over 40. And I just thought that was amusing in a town of Seward where we have many 100-year-old homes. And so I just want to commend everybody for speaking their mind, and I'm not going to go on because there's a lot of mourning going on back here. But thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I didn't take my 5 minutes.
That's okay. Anyone else from the public wish to speak on this item? Seeing no one else from the public, then I'll go ahead and close the public comment portion of the public hearing. So what we have before us is consideration of a resolution amending the redevelopment plan declaring the area northwest corner of Lincoln Street and North Columbia Avenue described as lots 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the Dewar subdivision, City of Seward, as standard and blighted, as substandard and blighted, and in need of redevelopment. Any other discussion or questions from the council? Yes, Sid.
I just wanna reiterate, and like Linda said, thank everybody for their input. Discussion is a good thing. My main concern from the beginning, and it still is, as we talked about, Hobbin brought it up early on, is, you know, precedent. I personally don't have an issue with apartments being put there because it's zoned for that. I'm just concerned about the process, and I think that in our history with blight, using the blight, study has been driven by us blighting an area, and then the developers come in and propose to us what they want to do, and that's how the process works. And the part of this process that I'm uncomfortable with is it's kind of it's going the other direction, where we're being forced to make a decision that I think should originate with us. And to be fair to developers in town, and this is probably impractical, Andrew, and you can probably speak to this more than anybody, is okay, if we're gonna pick out these 4 houses and say that they should be blighted, then let's go around town and pick out all the old houses that meet the criteria and blight them all, driven from our standpoint, so that not only would these 4 houses be eligible to be TIF'd possibly, but these 3, and this 6, and those 5, and this 2, and these 3, you know, all around the city, because then it would be fair to everybody, because why should everybody who has the idea of wanting to develop an old property have to do their own blight study and go through the whole process over and over again? So I would prefer to see the administration, the city driving this process, rather than the idea of a development. Again, like I say, I don't have an issue personally with apartments going there. Obviously, development and building in this city and in this state has existed for years before TIF existed. So there are people who have had the means to buy properties. When I had a discussion with Thomas a week or 2 ago, I said a good way to save money when you want to develop something is buy the property on the steps of the courthouse. And I have personal friends who do that. And they get them at a good deal, and then they've got all kinds of room to put money into it without the use of any other kind of funding. So that's what I would encourage us all to really think about, is a precedent that we might be setting. And going forward, what do we want to make sure our role in the whole process is when it comes to residential projects like this? And it sounds to me like the current property owner appears to be, for multiple reasons, which I don't want to go over again, under a bit of duress in this whole situation, which I'm also not comfortable with. And I don't want the city to play a part in that, personally. So, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Andrew, did you want, he mentioned you by name, did you want to add anything?
I can. If you have heard from enough of me, I mean.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, the point was, could you do that? You could, it's impractical, like you said. But part of this is, we keep talking about process. And this is the process. This is the public hearing. We've had 2 public hearings, published notice under the, twice published notice sent out to all the taxing jurisdictions, and then it's decided by the city council. That is the process. I mean, that is the process. So as far as making the determination, you could choose to do it where you look at and you say, all right, we're gonna get 35% of the community and do that all right now. That doesn't make a lot of sense, because because the purpose of creating a redevelopment area is redevelopment. So the idea that you have a project coming really is a good thing in my mind. Now again, this is your decision, but again, as far as process goes, this is the process, and it is the council making the decision. It's not a mandatory decision. You can choose where to blight as long as it meets that criteria. So it's ultimately your decision, but as far as precedent and this idea that that's dangerous, I guess in my mind, and I know it's new in Seward, but it's not new as far as statewide and the use and the way it's driven. And I guess I would just try to say this is the process, and this is the decision and how it's made with the definition in mind and that 35% gap.
Thank you. Anyone else from the council wish to comment or have a guess?
I can go first.
Dean, then Alan.
Yeah, really, this comes to a vote. All this means is that it's blighted. It doesn't further any steps other than this, correct?
Yeah, there are 2 steps here, 8 and 8A. 8 simply is a designation that is a blighted and substandard area, and then 8A would add that area to the TIF map. And that's what the recommendation was last night, the planning commission. They had 2 steps as well. First they had to make the designation, and then once the designation passed, then they went to adding it into the map.
But
That's it. As far as the project or utilizing TIF on this project or another project, that's all, again, with the process that Sid talked about. I mean, there'll be a whole nother planning commission, CRA, which is our TIF board, and ultimately still comes back to the council. So if you don't like the project, you'll have plenty of opportunities, and the public will have plenty of opportunities, well, at least 3, unless there's multiple hearings. And so, yeah, there is a pretty, and that's part of the challenge too, is because oftentimes when a developer comes to us with an idea, there is a time frame they have in mind, and it's not our job necessarily to help them with, make sure they meet their timeline, but the reality is that there's so many steps involved. This has been planning commission, and then here, if there is a TIF application, it goes planning commission, CRA, and then back here, and those,
Yeah, so if there is, so if these 2 resolutions are approved tonight, how it would happen would be TIF application is submitted for the actual project. That would go before the CRA, and again, there's a redevelopment plan amendment that actually looks at that specific project, all the details of that, dollars and cents, TIF uses, all those things that we've sort of been speculating about tonight. That will then have a hearing at the CRA, where the CRA will decide. Then we'll have a public hearing at the Planning Commission, again, with that project. Again, same published notice, everybody gets to come and talk, but we have that very specific project plan, and then it comes back to the council. The council will then approve both the plan amendment and then the actual redevelopment agreement, which is all the terms of the contract for the development and the use of TIF. So there's 3 more hearings, and there's a lot left to get to there after, after tonight, with a lot more detail at those 3 steps.
Well, it's obvious because that I'm on the fence on this because I have property across the street, so, and it really puts me in a bad position that not knowing what's gonna happen down the road is, I just don't know.
Okay. Ellen, did you have a question?
As usual, Dean is a step ahead of me. He
So
did
quick,
have,
make up a question so that we don't know that.
no, I'm happy to admit that. No, we are just considering one initial step in this process, and I do believe it meets the criteria for a blighted area. And it's just, whether we use TIF, whether it's a one tool in the toolbox, doesn't have to be used, and if an application comes, we can consider it. However, I think we should seriously consider, from what everybody's saying, is how do we, as a city, going forward, do you start dealing with properties that have deficiencies, and maybe we need to look at making changes in how we do that. And that's, to get something that's a little more consistent, and people have an expectation and can follow through, and there's a process for doing that. So I think that's what I've learned tonight, is people aren't really particularly happy if we're just picking out one bunch of properties. Why don't we go around and do them all? The other thing I thought of too is, if we're going to be looking at preservation, a lot of cities create a nonprofit. A nonprofit group can have much easier time accessing preservation funds and grants and all sorts of programs for preservation. So Seward could look at developing a nonprofit community group that would spearhead some of this. Let's get going on it. Let's take some action so we can preserve houses, so that they don't get this way. We can take action before these houses fall apart. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Ellen. Anyone else from the council wish to comment on this item?
I just want to comment on, I think I would agree with what Andrew said. It doesn't make sense for us to go around and fulfill 35% by picking and choosing houses at this point, by paying however many studies that would be. I think in looking at it, when we're looking at currently 19.5% of that being blighted, I think it does provide an opportunity for certain circumstances to where something that we may not have considered, but it still does meet that criteria. Now, whether we lead it or not, in my opinion, it really doesn't make a difference, because the land is what the land is, the area is what the area is. As far as setting precedents on this, I've heard many people, not all, say that this area is substandard. In a way, in my opinion, it does meet the blighted area, in that they would be fine with it if we blighted this first and hope that it leads to a development. But we have a development now. I don't know why it doesn't make sense to, if it meets the criteria, not to blight it at this time. That's it, and the only other thing would just be with the process and the code enforcement. I believe Ed did bring it up, was that it was council's direction that we did have a precedence of having delinquencies for years on the books and nothing was done, and it was council's recommendation not to set that as a precedent. And the timeline when it was, maybe in midsummer or something, or whenever that conversation was had, that it was to pick up the process and not let this linger and have years be a precedence for code violations to get those moving. And unfortunately, the timing of this came out, you know, that's a result of that direction, but it is what it is, in my opinion. That's all I think.
Anyone else from the council want to wish to comment on this item? So just to clarify, we have before us in this item number 8. This would be, we have 2 resolutions for 8 and 8A. The first resolution, I would need someone want to move forward to introduce the resolution, and then we can go through the vote. If not, then there would be no need to do item A, because item A is contingent on item 8. Right? You looked at me for me.
I'll introduce the resolution.
Okay. The resolution has been introduced and is designated as resolution number 2018-25. Would anyone like to move that this resolution be passed and adopted?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please register your votes.
Hey, can you clarify for Alyssa?
What's your
Yeah,
turn?
this is first time.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks.
So what do you need clarification on?
Like, we're voting
Okay.
whether or not to put this in the blight.
Oh, no. Okay, so the first 8, sorry. 8 is simply, are you gonna designate this property as blighted and substandard? And then if you do that, then 8A would actually add that blighted and substandard part of the city into the overall blighted and substandard map. So you have to make the designation, you have to call it a car, then you gotta put it in the lot,
Okay, so right now we're calling it a car.
if you want to.
If we wanna call it a car or not,
Then you would call it a car with this vote, and then the next, if it is a car, then the next vote puts the car in the lot.
It's a blighted car.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've never heard it described that way.
okay.
Andrew, you describe it like a car all the time, right?
That's exactly.
Thank you for the comment. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the 8th, we had a resolution was introduced, you registered your votes, right? Please display the votes.
Okay. Voting in favor, Wilkin, Beck, Miller, Schmidt. Opposed, Camford, Brett, Singleton, Hendricks.
I vote yes. Item 8A, consideration of resolution amending the city's redevelopment plan to add certain real estate to the city's redevelopment area. So this has been designated as blighted and substandard. Now the question is, do you want to add that to the blighted and substandard map? Okay,
A blighted car.
a lot. We're in the lot now.
Yep, yep.
Okay, please.
We have to make a motion.
Yeah, so that's 8A, but I first need someone to introduce that resolution if we want to do that. So we can start that process again.
I'll introduce the resolution.
Okay. 40 things going on.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
ask a question, can you repeat the roll again on the board, I couldn't hear it.
on the previous one, and it's also up on the wall.
It's not,
Boy, it was.
no, it wasn't.
That was.
Right here. That one was not.
Yeah.
That was.
Just a vote.
Can you reread it?
No, that is not the vote now.
Okay, please read the vote, please, thank you.
Voting opposed was Camford, Singleton, Schmidt, Hendricks.
Or no, Singleton was no.
I was no.
Yeah.
I thought
It
it
was
was 4 up there
4-4.
before.
It's 4-4.
It was 4-4.
Yeah, Josh broke the tie.
Yeah, I have 5 written down, so I don't know.
Could you please raise your hand if you voted no? just to confirm, if you voted yes, raise your hand. Those are the other four. So there's no confusion.
Well, I still don't have it right, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Schmidt
Schmidt was a yes.
You were yes.
I was a yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right, I apologize for that. So voting against the resolution was Camford, Singleton, Hendricks, and Fritz.
Okay, so now we're on item 8A. Again, this is also a resolution. This would be consideration resolution amending the city's redevelopment plan to add certain real estate to the city's redevelopment area. So for this, again, I would need someone to introduce the resolution. Ellen, did you still want to? Okay. The resolution has been introduced and is designated as resolution number 2018-26. Would anyone like to move that this resolution be passed and adopted?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Please register your votes. Please display the votes.
Voting in favor, Wilkin, Beck, Miller. Opposed, Camford, Fritz, Singleton, Schmidt, Hendricks.
Well, the motion fails, so we have,
Now we need to talk to our attorney.
yeah, so we'll talk to Kelly about that. So,
You're gonna wanna talk to Andrew about that.
yeah, well, Kelly and Andrew. So, just to clarify, so the resolution for number 8 passed, the resolution for 8A did not, fail. So, it failed, okay? So then item number 9 is consideration of bid specifications for bucket truck for electric department.
We
And
let
if you,
people-
and if you don't wanna stay for the exciting discussion on the bucket truck, you're more than welcome to leave. But if you wanna talk bucket trucks, you're welcome to stay.
Tempting.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah.
I know where they're at, and I can probably do it as fast as these people are leaving, I promise you.
That's why. Really no substitute. Yeah, I mean, well, it's still technically designated, but it's not part of the map, so it's kind of,
They're gonna create two
it's like,
things that can go in.
it's not on the map.
We're gonna get a lot of things out of this now, because Andrew's gonna figure this all out.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, so about that 2.5% COLA,
They should be separate.
This is going a longer one.
Oh, no, why'd you guys need that first though?
Why do we have to do that? I agree, it's polite. I don't agree to add it.
Vote no on them both and be done with it.
Yeah, both man, we can do it.
A tie vote.
All right. Are you guys coming or going, or staying, or what are we doing? Okay. I'm not trying to force you out, we just wanna keep going.
Just wanna talk about this bucket.
Yeah, we got electric. Ruther wants his
Yeah,
bucket.
Larry
Let's
stayed
go.
with the pow-
Larry's not
powwow.
going anywhere until he gets his bucket truck. Get it. So,
We ready?
Yes.
1 second here, just get the doors and be dinging here 2 more
Can we
times.
take that? During meetings?
Okay. We're gonna go ahead and continue with our agenda. We have item number 9, this is consideration of bid specifications for bucket truck for electric department. And we have Larry Ruther here to answer any questions, but Greg, do you wanna kick us off?
Just have the bid specs in there. This is an item that is significantly over our normal thresholds where we would just get quotes. The hard part is most of the design elements that go along with this, it's gonna be a very specific bucket truck that we know exactly what it's gonna be, but due to it being over the state statutory thresholds, it has to go through this process. It's a budgeted item that Larry's in dire need of, so we need to get this out the door and get it ready to bid and get them back in so he can get it on order and get it in here as soon as possible.
Are there any questions or comments on this item? So this is just to approve the bid.
Just the specs and to
specifications.
send it off, and then we'll
Yeah.
approve bids once they come back in.
Yeah.
Move for approval.
Well, no, everybody wants to make a motion. You have a motion and a second, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, please register your votes, please display the votes.
Morning, McCarter, welcome back, Fritz Miller, Single, Schmidt, Hendricks, motion.
Oh my goodness, I forgot this is what we did,
Oh, item number 10, consideration for replacing the existing flashing light beacon with a new rectangular rapid flashing beacon, RRFB, at the school crossing of Highway 15 on Hillcrest Drive. Jake Vasa,
He has two.
Basha.
Basha, is it Basha?
Oh, it's in the name.
Was there an H in there?